I thought my dad was just another deadbeat who abandoned us when I was 3. Turns out he's been playing guitar on stages across the country, while I've been searching for him my entire life. And when I finally found him through a DNA test, the truth about why he left almost destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. For as long as I can remember, it's just been me and my mom, Linda, against the world. Growing up in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, I learned early that some questions were better left unasked. Questions like, "Where's my dad?" Or "Why don't I look anything like you, Mom?" My mother is petite with straight brown hair and hazel eyes, the kind of woman who blends into a crowd without trying. Me, I'm tall, almost 6 feet, with wild curly red hair that seems to have a mind of its own, and these piercing green eyes that people always comment on. As a kid, I used to stare at myself in the mirror, wondering where these features came from, like I was some kind of genetic mystery. Mom always had the same story ready whenever I asked about my father. "He was just a guy I dated briefly," she'd say, never quite meeting my eyes. When I told him I was pregnant, he made it clear he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. "Men just aren't cut out to be fathers, honey." The story was always consistent, always delivered with the same tired sigh, like she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. According to her, his name was David Miller, a generic name that could belong to anyone. He was supposedly from California, worked in construction, and had commitment issues. "Trust me, Sarah," she'd add, "you're better off without him." I wanted to believe her. It was easier than admitting that somewhere out there was a man who chose not to know me, who walked away before I even took my first breath. But as I got older, the story started feeling hollow, like a shell with nothing inside. In high school, I became obsessed with music, not just listening to it, but understanding it, dissecting it. I taught myself guitar on an old acoustic I found at a garage sale, and within months, I was writing my own songs. My music teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, was amazed at how naturally it came to me. "You have an ear for this that can't be taught," he told me. "It's genetic." It's that word, genetic. Always made my stomach twist. What else was genetic that I didn't know about? What talents, what quirks, what medical conditions might be lurking in my DNA? Inherited from a father who was nothing more than a ghost story, college brought new questions. My roommate Emma was doing a family tree project for her genealogy class, calling grandparents and great-aunts, discovering cousins in distant states. Watching her piece together her family's history made me realize how little I actually knew about mine. My mom's side was a small family. Her parents died when I was young. She had one sister who lived in Florida and sent Christmas cards. But half of me was a complete blank. It's when the migraines started. Debilitating headaches that would leave me curled up in my dorm room with the lights off, unable to function for hours. The campus health center prescribed stronger and stronger medications, but nothing seemed to help. During one particularly bad episode, the doctor asked about my family medical history. "Any history of migraines on either side of your family?" Dr. Peterson asked, pen poised over her clipboard. I don't know," I admitted, feeling embarrassed. "I don't really know my father's medical history." She looked up, surprised. "Well, that's important information. Migraines often run in families. You should try to get that information if possible." When I called my mom to ask, her response was sharp and defensive. "Sarah, I've told you everything I know about your father. Stop digging into the past. Some doors are meant to stay closed." But I couldn't let it go. The migraines were affecting my studies, my social life, everything. I needed answers, and it was becoming clear that my mom either couldn't or wouldn't provide them. That summer, working at a local coffee shop, I met Jake, a regular customer who worked for a genealogy company. He'd come in every morning, order a large dark roast, spend an hour on his laptop, helping people discover their family histories. One day during a slow afternoon, I found myself telling him about my situation. "You know," he said, looking thoughtful, "DNA testing has come a really long way. It's not just about finding distant cousins anymore. People are connecting with immediate family members all the time. Parents, siblings, even children they never knew existed." The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. What if I could actually find my father? What if he wasn't the uncaring deadbeat my mom had painted him to be? What if there was a whole other side to my story that I'd never been told? But there was also the fear of confirmation. What if I found him and he really didn't want anything to do with me? What if my mom's story was true, and I was just setting myself up for rejection all over again? Jake must have seen the conflict on my face, because he leaned forward and said, "Look, Sarah, you don't have to contact anyone if you don't want to. But having the information, knowing the truth about where you come from, that's powerful. That's yours by right." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about what he'd said. By right. Did I have a right to know who my father was? Did I have a right to medical information that could help with my migraines? Did I have a right to understand why I had this deep, inexplicable connection to music that seemed to come from nowhere? The questions swirled in my mind until dawn, and by the time I got up for work, I'd made my decision. I was going to take a DNA test. Whatever the results revealed, whatever truths came to light, I was ready to face them. I needed to know who I really was, where I really came from. I just had no idea that the truth would be stranger and more complicated than any story my mom had ever told me. The DNA test kit arrived in a plain white box that seemed too small to contain something that could potentially change my entire life. I stared at it sitting on my kitchen counter for 3 days, before I finally worked up the courage to open it. The instructions were simple enough. Spit in a tube, seal it up, mail it back. But knowing that this little vial of saliva could unlock decades of secrets made my hands shake as I prepared the sample. The waiting period was torture. 4 to 6 weeks, they said, but each day felt like a year. I found myself checking my email obsessively, refreshing the website portal, Googling stories about DNA discoveries both heartwarming and horrifying. I read about people finding siblings, parents discovering children they never knew existed, families reunited after decades apart. But I also read about the dark discoveries, affairs exposed, paternity fraud revealed, family lies unraveled in the most painful ways. My mom noticed my anxiety but didn't know the cause. "You've been jumpy lately," she observed one evening when I came over for our weekly dinner. "Is everything okay at work?" I almost told her then. The words were right there, balanced on the tip of my tongue. But something in her eyes stopped me, a wariness that I'd never noticed before, like she was always braced for a conversation she didn't want to have. "Just tired," I said instead. "The migraines have been bad lately." Her face immediately softened with concern. "Have you tried that new medication Dr. Peterson prescribed? It's not helping much. She says it would help to know if there's a family history of migraines. But since we don't know anything about my father's side," I let the sentence hang there, a gentle probe. Mom's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sarah, honey, I've told you everything I know. Your father wasn't the type to stick around and share family medical histories." But something about her tone felt rehearsed, like she was reciting lines from a script she'd memorized long ago. And for the first time, I found myself wondering if my mom was lying to me. The thought hit me like a physical blow. My mom, who had been my rock, my constant, my only family, was she keeping secrets? And if so, why? Week 5 of waiting turned into week 6, then week 7. I was starting to think something had gone wrong with my sample when the email finally arrived. "Your DNA results are ready." My heart hammered as I logged into the website, clicking through pages of ethnic breakdowns and health predispositions, until I reached the section I really cared about. DNA relatives. The first name on the list made my blood freeze. Marcus Thompson, close family match. Predicted relationship. Father not David Miller. Marcus Thompson. Below his name was a small profile picture showing a man with wild curly red hair, just like mine, and those same piercing green eyes. He was holding a guitar, mid-performance, his face lit up with the kind of joy I felt when I played music. With trembling fingers, I clicked on his profile. Marcus Thompson, age 52, lived in Austin, Texas. His public family tree showed parents named Robert and Helen Thompson and a sister named Patricia. But what made my breath catch was his listed occupation. Professional musician, lead guitarist for Midnight Crossing. I'd heard of them. They were a moderately successful rock band from the 90s. The kind that had a few radio hits and toured constantly, but never quite made it to stadium level. They were still active, still touring, playing at mid-sized venues across the country. My father wasn't some deadbeat construction worker who'd abandoned his responsibilities. He was a musician, a successful one, living the kind of life that most people only dreamed about. and he had no idea I existed. I spent the next hour going down a rabbit hole, Googling everything I could find about Marcus Thompson and Midnight Crossing. There were concert videos on YouTube, where I could see him playing guitar with the same intense focus I brought to my own music. There were interviews where his voice had the same slightly raspy quality as mine. There were photos from the 90s where he looked so much like me that it was almost comical. But the more I learned, the more confused I became. The timeline didn't match my mom's story at all. In 1995, the year I was conceived, Midnight Crossing was at the height of their success. They'd just released their biggest album and were headlining a major tour, according to the concert dates I found online. They played at the Crystal Ballroom in Portland on March 15, 1995. I was born on December 3, 1995. 9 months before that would put my conception right around that Portland concert date. Realization hit me like a freight train. My mom hadn't dated some random construction worker named David Miller. She'd had an encounter with a rock star, a musician whose DNA had gifted me with the musical abilities I'd always wondered about. But why lie? Why create an elaborate fiction about a deadbeat dad when the truth was so much more interesting? What was she trying to protect me from? What was she trying to protect herself from? I called in sick to work the next day and drove to the library, spending hours searching through newspaper archives and concert reviews from 1995. I found a photo from the Portland concert that made my heart stop. It showed the crowd, and there in the front row was a young woman with brown hair and hazel eyes who looked exactly like my mom would have looked 23 years ago. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to hear it from her. I needed to understand why she'd built our entire relationship on what was essentially a lie. That evening, I sat in my car outside my mom's apartment building, staring at the DNA results on my phone screen. Marcus Thompson, father. The words seemed to pulse with possibility and accusation in equal measure. I finally worked up the courage to go upstairs, but when I knocked on the door, my mom took one look at my face and said, "Oh, Sarah, what have you done?" The silence in my mom's living room felt thick enough to cut. She stood frozen in her doorway, her face pale as paper, staring at me like I was a stranger. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know before I even opened my mouth. "You know, don't you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know who he really is?" Mom closed the door slowly, deliberately, like she was buying time to prepare for a conversation she'd been dreading for 28 years. When she finally turned to face me, her hands were shaking. "Sit down, Sarah." Her voice was different now, smaller somehow, like the weight of keeping this secret had been crushing her all along. "No." I stayed standing, pulling out my phone to show her the DNA results. "I want to know why you lied to me." "David Miller doesn't exist, does he?" "My father is Marcus Thompson from Midnight Crossing, and you've known it this entire time." The color drained from her face completely. She sank into her favorite armchair, the one where she'd read me bedtime stories and help me with homework. And suddenly, she looked every one of her 51 years. "How did you find out?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "DNA test." I held up my phone again. He's listed as my father, Mom, a 99.8% match. There's no hiding from science. She buried her face in her hands, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But when she looked up at me, her eyes were dry and filled with something that looked almost like relief. "I always wondered when this day would come," she said. "When technology would catch up to my lies. The admission should have felt like a victory, but instead it felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Everything I thought I knew about my origin story was crumbling, and I wasn't sure what would be left standing when the dust settled." "Why?" I sat down across from her, my anger temporarily replaced by confusion. "Why create this elaborate story about some deadbeat construction worker? Why not just tell me the truth?" Mom was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the Portland skyline. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with old pain. "Because the truth was complicated, Sarah. Because I was 23 years old, and I made a decision that I was unsure you'd be able to understand or forgive." She told me the story then, the real story. How she'd gone to the Midnight Crossing concert with her college roommate. How Marcus had noticed her in the crowd during his guitar solo. How he'd sent security to bring her backstage after the show. How one night had turned into the most magical experience of her young life, talking until dawn about music and dreams and the future, feeling like she'd met her soulmate, He was leaving the next day for the next city on the tour, she said. But we exchanged numbers, made promises to stay in touch. I thought it was the beginning of something beautiful. Instead, it was the beginning of heartbreak. Marcus called a few times from the road, but the calls became less frequent as the tour went on. By the time my mom realized she was pregnant, she hadn't heard from him in 6 weeks. I tried calling the number he gave me, but it was disconnected. I reached out to the band's management company, but they said they couldn't pass along personal messages. I even went to another one of their concerts in Seattle when I was 4 months pregnant, hoping to talk to him, but security wouldn't let me near the backstage area. The picture she painted was heartbreaking. A young woman, pregnant and alone, was trying desperately to contact the father of her child, while he remained completely unreachable. Protected by the fortress of fame and touring schedules. "So you gave up?" I asked, though I already knew the answer wasn't that simple. "I gave up on him," she said. "But I never gave up on you. I decided that I could raise you better as a single mother than you could be raised by a father who clearly didn't want to be found. But there was more to it than that. There was shame mixed in with the practical concerns. Shame at having been the girl who slept with a rock star after one. Night shame at being abandoned. Shame at raising a child whose father lived a life that was the complete opposite of the stable, quiet existence she wanted to build for us. The David Miller story was easier, she admitted. It explained your existence without making me look like some groupie who got knocked up by a musician. It let me control the narrative. I understood her reasoning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd robbed me of something important. All those years wondering about my musical abilities, all those questions about where my height and hair color came from, all those medical forms where I had to write unknown under paternal family history, all of that confusion and uncertainty could have been avoided, but what about now? I asked. He might have matured, grown up, become someone who would want to know he has a daughter. Don't I have a right to find out? The fear in my mom's eyes was immediate and raw. "Sarah, please. What if you reach out to him and he rejects you? What if he's married now, has other children, and you're just an unwelcome reminder of a mistake from his past?" I've spent 28 years protecting you from that possibility, but something in me had shifted during this conversation. Maybe it was finally knowing the truth, or maybe it was realizing that my mom's fear had been making decisions for me my entire life. Either way, I knew what I had to do. "That's not your choice to make anymore, Mom," I said, standing up. "I'm not a little girl you need to protect from the truth. I'm an adult, and I deserve the chance to make my own decisions about my relationship with my father." The look of panic that crossed her face almost made me reconsider. But then I thought about Marcus Thompson, playing his guitar on stages across the country, never knowing that somewhere in Portland, Oregon, his daughter was playing guitar too. Writing songs and wondering where her talent came from, I was going to contact him. The only question was how. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my laptop open beside me. Marcus Thompson's social media profiles glowing in the darkness. His Facebook page was mostly public. Tour dates, band photos, the occasional post about vintage guitars, or his favorite dive bars in whatever city they were playing. But what struck me most were the comments from fans, the way people talked about him. "Marcus is the most genuine guy in rock," one comment read. "Stayed after the show for 2 hours just talking to fans and signing stuff for kids. Met him at a guitar shop in Denver last month," said another. "Didn't even recognize him at first, but he helped me pick out my first electric guitar. Gave me his card and told me to call if I ever had questions about playing." This wasn't the picture of a man who abandoned his responsibilities. This was someone who seemed to genuinely care about people, especially young musicians. The contradiction between this Marcus and the absent father of my mother's story was stark. I'd been going back and forth for 3 days about how to contact him when the decision was made for me. My phone buzzed with a notification from the DNA website. Someone had viewed my profile. Marcus Thompson had seen the match. My heart hammered as I logged into the website and saw a message waiting in my inbox. The subject line was simple. "Could we talk?" "Hi, Sarah," the message began. "I hope this doesn't come as too much of a shock, but the DNA website shows that we're closely related. I'm not sure what this means or how this is possible, but I'd very much like to understand. Would you be willing to have a phone conversation? I promise I'm not crazy, just very confused. My number is below if you'd like to call." Marcus, I stared at the message for what felt like hours. He seemed genuinely surprised, which meant my mom had been right about one thing. He really had no idea I existed. But his tone was curious rather than defensive, open rather than rejecting. He wanted to understand, wanted to talk. It took me 6 attempts to dial his number. I'd get halfway through and hang up, my nerves getting the better of me. On the 7th try, I forced myself to let it ring. Hello? His voice was exactly like it sounded in interviews. Warm, slightly raspy, with a hint of a Texas accent. Hi, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. This is Sarah Reynolds. Sent me a message on the DNA site. There was a pause, and I could hear him take a deep breath. Sarah, thank you for calling. I have to admit I've been staring at that DNA match for days trying to figure out what it means. The site says we're closely related, possibly father and daughter. But that doesn't seem possible. I don't have any children. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. This was the moment of truth, the point where everything would change for both of us. I think you do, I said quietly. I think you have me. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you help me understand? So I told him about my mom, about the Portland concert in March 1995, about being born 9 months later. I described my musical abilities, my red hair, my green eyes. With each detail, I could hear his breathing get shakier. Linda, he said suddenly, his voice barely audible. Oh my God, Linda Carlson. You remember her? Remember her? He let out a shaky laugh. Sarah, I've been thinking about your mother for 28 years. She was... She was incredible. We talked all night after that show. I thought I was falling in love with her. The emotion in his voice was raw and immediate, like he was transported back to that night. It was nothing like the casual encounter my mom had described. But you disappeared, I said, not accusingly, just trying to understand. No, I didn't disappear. I called her for weeks. I had her number. We talked almost every day while we were on tour. But then suddenly, the number was disconnected, and I couldn't reach her. I thought maybe she'd lost interest, found someone else. I never stopped wondering what happened. My mom had changed her number. She'd cut off contact and never told me. Marcus, I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue. I'm your daughter. I was born on December 3rd, 1995. The silence that followed was the longest 30 seconds of my life. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him processing this information, reorganizing 28 years of his life around this new reality. I have a daughter, he said finally, and his voice was thick with tears. I have a 28-year-old daughter who I've never met. Do you... Do you want to meet me? I asked, afraid of the answer. Want to? He laughed. But it was a sound filled with joy rather than humor. Sarah, I can't think of anything I've ever wanted more in my entire life, but I have so many questions. Why didn't Linda tell me? Why didn't she let me be part of your life? Did she think I wouldn't want you? I found myself crying then, not from sadness, but from relief. This man, this stranger who was my father, wanted me. The fear that had been gnawing at me for weeks, that he would reject me, that I would be an unwelcome surprise, melted away with those simple words. It's complicated, I said. But I want to meet you too. I want to know you. Where are you? Where do you live? Portland. Same place where you met my mom? I'm in Austin right now, but we have a show in Seattle next weekend. It's just a few hours from you. Could you? Do you want to come to the show? Maybe we could talk afterward.
A week.
I was going to meet my father in 1 week. The father, who wasn't a deadbeat construction worker, but a successful musician who'd been wondering about my mom for nearly 3 decades. Yes, I said. I'll be there, Sarah. His voice was soft now, almost tentative. Yeah, I'm so glad you found me. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you growing up, but I'm here now, if you want me to be. For the first time in 28 years, I felt like I knew where I belonged. The week leading up to the Seattle concert was a whirlwind of emotions. I told my mom about my phone call with Marcus, and the conversation didn't go well. She was furious that I'd contacted him without telling her, terrified about what his presence in my life might mean, and heartbroken that I'd learned the truth about her changing her phone number all those years ago. You don't understand what you're getting into, she said, pacing around her living room like a caged animal. He's a musician, Sarah. His life is chaos. Touring, drinking, different women in every city. That's not the kind of stability you need in your life. I'm 28 years old, Mom. I think I can decide what kind of stability I need. But what if he hurts you? What if he gets bored of playing daddy and disappears again? I won't be able to protect you from that kind of pain. I could see the fear in her eyes, but I could also see something else. Guilt. She knew she'd made choices that had affected my entire life, and now those choices were catching up with her. He didn't disappear before, Mom. You cut him off. You made that decision for all of us. The accusation hung between us like a wall. My mom sank into her chair, looking older than I'd ever seen her. I was scared, she whispered. I was 23 and pregnant, and I was terrified that he'd reject us both. I thought it was easier to reject him first. I wanted to be angry with her, but looking at her face, I could only feel sad. Sad for her, sad for Marcus, sad for all the years we'd lost because fear had made our decisions for us. The day of the concert, I drove to Seattle alone. My mom had offered to come with me, but I needed to do this myself. The venue was a mid-sized theater, the kind of place that held maybe 1,000 people. I'd gotten there early and was standing near the stage door when I saw him. Marcus Thompson in person was both exactly what I'd expected and completely different. He was taller than I'd imagined, probably 6'2", with the same wild red hair as mine, but streaked with silver now. His green eyes were kind but tired, like someone who'd lived a full life, but was still searching for something. When he saw me, he stopped walking. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the parking lot. Two strangers who shared the same genetic code, the same musical soul. Sarah, he called out, his voice uncertain. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He walked over slowly, like he was afraid I might bolt if he moved too fast. You look just like me when I was your age, he said, his voice filled with wonder, except prettier. That broke the tension, and I laughed. Thanks, I think. Can I? He gestured awkwardly. Can I hug you? I know this is weird, but I've been wanting to hug my daughter for 28 years. The embrace was tentative at first, but then he pulled me tight against his chest, and I could feel him shaking. When we broke apart, both of our eyes were wet. I can't believe you're real, he said. I can't believe Linda had my baby and I never knew. She was scared, I said, feeling the need to defend her despite everything. She thought you didn't want us. His face crumpled. Oh, Sarah, I would have wanted you so much. I would have moved mountains to be part of your life if I'd known you existed. We talked for an hour, before he had to go get ready for the show. He told me about his life, how he'd never married, never had other children, how he'd always felt like something was missing. He asked about me, about my music, about growing up without him. Every question felt like he was trying to memorize my entire life, make up for all the conversations we'd never had. I want you to watch from the side of the stage, he said as his bandmates started calling for him. I want to play for my daughter. The concert was incredible. I'd never seen Marcus perform live before, and watching him on stage was like looking into a mirror of my own musical soul. The way he moved with the guitar, the way his face lit up during solos, the way he connected with the audience. It was everything I felt when I played music, magnified by years of experience and confidence. But the most amazing moment came near the end of the set. Marcus stepped up to the microphone and said, I want to dedicate this next song to someone very special who's watching from the side of the stage tonight. This is for my daughter Sarah, who I just met today, but who I've been missing my whole life. The crowd cheered, but I barely heard them. They'd claimed me publicly in front of 1,000 people. After 28 years of not existing in his world, I was suddenly the most important person in it. After the show, we went to a quiet diner and talked until dawn. He told me about his regrets, his career, his hopes for the future. I told him about my music, my job, my life in Portland. We compared hands and laughed at how similar they were. We talked about genetics and talent, and whether musical ability was really inherited or just coincidence. I want to be part of your life, he said as the sun was coming up. I know I can't make up for 28 years, but I want to try. If you'll let me. I want that too, I said. But we need to figure out how to do this without destroying my relationship with my mom. Your mom loves you, he said. She made mistakes, but they came from love. We'll figure it out together. When I drove back to Portland that morning, everything felt different. I had a father now, a real relationship with the man who'd given me half my DNA and apparently all of my musical passion. But I also had a mother who was terrified of losing me to the life she'd had tried so hard to protect me from. The real work was just beginning. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a recording studio in Austin, Texas, watching my father lay down guitar tracks for Midnight Crossing's new album. It's surreal in the best possible way. Being here in his world, understanding finally where my musical abilities come from. Feeling like a missing piece of myself has been found. The journey to get here hasn't been easy. My mom struggled for months with my relationship with Marcus, swinging between guilt about the years she cost us and fear that she was losing her daughter to the life she tried so hard to shield me from. There were tears, arguments, and long conversations that lasted until dawn. But gradually, painfully, we worked through it. The breakthrough came when Marcus called her. I've been trying to get them to talk for weeks, but my mom refused. Then one day she called me crying. "He apologized to me," she said through her tears. "He said he was sorry for not being there for you, sorry that I had to raise you alone, sorry that his lifestyle made me feel like I had to choose between him and your stability. He thanked me for doing such a good job raising you." That conversation opened something up in my mom that had been closed for 28 years. She started sharing memories from that night in 1995, admitting how much she'd cared about Marcus, how devastating it had been to feel abandoned by him. When she learned that he'd tried to call, that he'd been looking for her too, she broke down completely. "Robbed all three of us," she said. "I was so afraid of getting hurt that I hurt everyone instead." But Marcus, true to the generous spirit his fans had always talked about, held no grudges. When he came to Portland for the first time in nearly 3 decades, not for a concert, but to meet the woman who'd raised his daughter, he brought flowers and an acoustic guitar. "This is for you," he told my mom, presenting the guitar. "Sarah tells me she learned to play on an old one from a garage sale. I thought maybe you'd like to learn too. We could take lessons together." Bye. That guitar is sitting in my mom's apartment now, and she's been taking weekly lessons for 4 months. She's terrible at it, but she laughs every time she hits a wrong chord. And there's a lightness in her that I haven't seen since I was a little girl. As for Marcus and me, we talk almost every day now. He's teaching me advanced guitar techniques over video calls, sending me recordings of new songs to get my opinion, including me in the creative process in ways that feel natural and easy. The band has started incorporating some of my songwriting ideas into their new material. And there's talk of me joining them on stage for a few songs during their next tour. But the relationship is deeper than just music. Marcus has become the father I always wondered about, supportive, encouraging, genuinely interested in my life and thoughts. He's helped me understand family medical history that's already been useful for my migraines. He's introduced me to his sister Patricia, who cried when she met me and immediately declared herself my favorite aunt. He's shown me photos of his parents, my grandparents, who died before I was born, but who apparently had the same love of music that runs through our family. The most surprising thing has been how naturally it all fits. Why I'd worried that meeting my father as an adult would feel forced or awkward, that we'd struggle to build a relationship without the foundation of shared childhood experiences. Instead, it feels like we've always known each other, like we were just waiting for the right moment to find each other again. My mom is part of this new dynamic too.